Welcome to Stories That Heal, where the smallest acts of kindness become the greatest stories. In this episode, a quiet evening transforms into an emotional journey as Jason Statham meets a war veteran with a remarkable past. What follows is a moving exchange that reminds us all of the power of empathy and the enduring ripple effect of compassion. Get ready for a story that will stay with you long after the credits roll. The glow of the chandelier cast a warm, golden light over the polished marble floors of Le Jardin, the crown jewel of New York City's fine dining scene. Jason Statham adjusted his tailored navy blazer as he entered the restaurant, greeted by a burst of muted murmurs from the patrons. His reputation preceded him. After all, he wasn't just an action star, he was a cultural icon. Tonight, however, he was looking for something far from the spotlight, a quiet evening to enjoy a good meal and a moment of peace. The maitre d', a composed woman named Clarissa, approached him with her signature grace. "Mr. Statham, welcome back. Your usual table?" she asked, her voice soft but confident. Jason nodded, flashing a polite smile. "Perfect, Clarissa. Thank you." As he followed her to his seat, Jason scanned the room with his sharp, discerning eyes. Le Jardin was a symphony of elegance. Wine glasses shimmering like diamonds, servers gliding between tables with ballet-like precision, and conversations flowing in hushed, dignified tones. Yet, amidst the opulence, something caught Jason's attention. Near the back of the restaurant, tucked in a cramped corner by the kitchen doors, sat Henry Wheeler, an elderly man with silver hair and a posture marked by years of service and sacrifice. His well-worn suit hinted at modest means, but the military medals pinned to his lapel spoke volumes about his history. A server hurried past his table, narrowly avoiding bumping into his chair, and Jason's jaw tightened. Jason reached his table, a prime spot by the window, offering a sweeping view of the city's skyline. As Clarissa handed him the menu, Jason's attention was drawn back to Henry. Across the room, a man in a sharp suit, seated at a table adjacent to Henry's, waved over a server with an air of entitlement. "What is this?" The businessman, Charles Langston, barked, gesturing dramatically toward Henry. "Are you seriously seating me next to that?" The server blinked, visibly caught off guard. "I'm sorry, sir. Is there an issue?" Charles huffed, his tone dripping with disdain. "An issue? You've placed me next to a man who looks like he stumbled in here by accident. This is Le Jardin, not some diner off the highway." Henry, seated quietly, looked up with a polite but firm gaze. "Young man," he said, his voice steady but calm, "I assure you, I am right where I'm supposed to be." The businessman snorted. "Well, I beg to differ." Turning back to the server, he snapped, "Move me!" "Now." Jason's grip on his menu tightened. He leaned toward Clarissa, his voice low but resolute. "Who's the gentleman in the corner?" Clarissa glanced toward Henry. "That's Mr. Wheeler. He's a veteran. Comes in every so often, usually on special occasions. He prefers to keep to himself." Jason nodded, his gaze never leaving the scene. Charles's voice cut through the room again. "I didn't pay for a five-star experience to be subjected to this." Henry straightened, his expression unyielding. "You talk about me like I'm not sitting right here," he said, his tone tinged with quiet authority. "I suggest you find a little respect before you embarrass yourself further." The room grew noticeably quieter. Diners began casting sideways glances, curiosity piqued by the rising tension. Jason sat back, considering his next move. He'd seen plenty of disrespect in his life, but this was something else. After a moment, he pressed the call button on his table. Clarissa arrived promptly, her brow furrowed. "Something wrong, Mr. Statham?" she asked. Jason gestured toward Henry. "Switch our tables," he said simply. Clarissa's eyes widened slightly. "Sir, your seat is one of our most sought after. Are you sure?" Jason cut her off with a firm nod. "I'm sure." He deserves better than being shoved into a corner next to that clown. Clarissa hesitated, then nodded. I'll arrange it immediately. Jason rose, grabbing his glass of water and giving Charles a pointed glance as he passed. The businessman's smug demeanor faltered slightly under Jason's piercing gaze. As Clarissa approached Henry, she leaned down and spoke softly. Mr. Wheeler, we'd like to move you to a more comfortable table. Henry looked up, puzzled. Why would you do that? Clarissa smiled. Let's just say someone thinks you've earned it. Jason approached, extending his hand. Henry Wheeler, is it? He asked, his voice steady. Henry nodded, shaking Jason's hand firmly. That's right. And you are? Jason Statham, he replied. You're moving to my table, I insist. Henry tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. And what's the catch? No catch, Jason said, his expression earnest. Just a little respect where it's due. Henry hesitated, then stood. Well, Mr. Statham, it seems I don't have much choice. Thank you. As they switched tables, the restaurant buzzed with murmurs. Jason settled into the modest corner seat, unbothered by the proximity to the kitchen. He nodded toward Charles, who looked flustered. Enjoy your evening, Jason said, his tone laced with subtle irony. Meanwhile, Henry lowered himself into Jason's former seat, his expression a mix of gratitude and curiosity. He glanced at Clarissa, who leaned in and whispered, I think you'll enjoy the view. Henry smiled faintly. I think I already am. As Jason's meal resumed in the back, the energy in the restaurant shifted. What began as a confrontation was now a story unfolding, one that would ripple far beyond the walls of Le Jardin. Jason sat in the modest corner seat, his back to the bustling kitchen doors. The cacophony of clattering plates and hurried voices didn't bother him. In fact, it felt oddly grounding after the privileged quiet of his former seat. Across the room, Henry Wheeler now occupied Jason's prime table by the window. The older man seemed slightly out of place amid the polished marble and glowing chandeliers, but his quiet dignity commanded respect. The subtle glances from other patrons, their hushed conversations, all hinted at a collective acknowledgement of the moment. Jason waved over a server, a young woman who appeared flustered as she approached him. Sir, I just wanted to say, that was an incredible gesture, she said, her voice tinged with awe. Jason offered a faint smile. It's just a seat, he replied. He's earned more than that. The server nodded, clearly struggling to articulate her thoughts before retreating to fetch his order. Jason leaned back in his chair, allowing his gaze to sweep over the room. He could see the effects of his decision rippling outward. At the prime table, Henry adjusted the napkin on his lap, glancing around with a subtle air of disbelief. Across from him, the businessman Charles Langston scowled into his drink, his earlier smugness replaced by something closer to embarrassment. He shifted uncomfortably, his gaze occasionally flicking toward Henry, then quickly away. Mr. Wheeler, a voice interrupted Henry's quiet contemplation. It was Clarissa, the maitre d'. She carried herself with the grace of someone who knew the weight of her role, but had learned to navigate even the trickiest patrons. Would you care for a complimentary glass of wine? Mr. Statham insists. Henry smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. That man's something else, isn't he? Tell him I'll accept his generosity, but only if he joins me for dessert later. Clarissa smiled. I'll pass along the message. Nearby, Charles's irritation boiled over. He leaned toward his dining companion, speaking in a low, angry tone. Can you believe this? They're making a spectacle out of nothing. His companion, a polished woman in her 40s, arched an eyebrow. Out of nothing? She repeated, her tone icy. I'd call it dignity, Charles. Something you might want to learn about. Charles's face darkened, but he said nothing, retreating into his seat with a huff. Meanwhile, Jason remained unperturbed in his new corner. The server returned with his meal, a perfectly seared steak paired with roasted vegetables. As she placed the plate in front of him, she hesitated. "Mr. Statham, the kitchen asked me to pass this on," she said, handing him a small note. Jason unfolded the slip of paper. It read, "For the man who knows what real class is. Our compliments." He chuckled softly, nodding his thanks before digging into his meal. At the center of the restaurant, Henry became an unintentional focal point. A young couple seated nearby leaned over to introduce themselves, expressing admiration for his service and asking about the medals pinned to his lapel. Henry, ever gracious, shared brief snippets of his history, his time in Vietnam, his years of service, and the life he'd built afterward. "I've always believed in serving others," Henry said, his voice steady but warm. "And tonight, it seems someone served me instead. That young man back there, he's got a good heart." As the night wore on, the atmosphere in Le Jardin shifted. What had begun as a confrontation evolved into a shared moment of reflection and admiration. Other diners began to offer quiet acknowledgments to both Henry and Jason. Jason, ever observant, caught glimpses of it all. He saw the ripple effect of his decision, the way a small gesture could shift the energy of an entire room. He had acted on instinct, but now he realized just how far-reaching the impact of that instinct could be. As the evening deepened, Le Jardin's usual atmosphere of hushed elegance transformed into something unexpected, a rare blend of warmth and camaraderie. Conversations buzzed among diners as they reflected on what had just unfolded, a testament to the power of empathy and grace. Henry Wheeler, seated in the prime spot by the window, became the center of attention. Yet, his humility never wavered. A few more diners approached to offer quiet thanks or express admiration for his service. Among them was a young boy, no older than 10, who tugged at his mother's hand as he shyly approached. "Excuse me, sir," the boy said, his voice barely audible. "My grandpa was a soldier, too. Thank you for being brave like him." Henry smiled, his weathered face softening. He leaned forward slightly, meeting the boy's gaze. "Well, thank you, young man. And tell your grandpa I said thank you, too. He's a hero in my book." The boy beamed, clutching his mother's hand as they walked back to their table. Henry watched them go, his chest swelling with pride and emotion. At his corner seat near the kitchen, Jason observed it all with a quiet satisfaction. He'd made the decision to give up his seat without hesitation, but he hadn't anticipated the ripple effect it would have. The act had taken on a life of its own, bringing strangers together in a way he hadn't imagined. As Jason finished his steak, Clarissa approached him with a soft smile. "Mr. Wheeler has asked if you would join him for dessert," she said. He insisted. Jason hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Of course," he replied, standing and smoothing the front of his shirt. He grabbed his glass of water and followed her back to the table by the window. Henry rose slightly as Jason approached, extending a hand. "I thought I'd get a chance to thank you properly," he said. "Please sit." Jason shook his hand and took a seat across from him. "There's no need for thanks," he said simply. "You've done more than enough for this country. The least I could do was offer you a comfortable seat." Henry chuckled, his eyes twinkling. "You say that, but gestures like yours don't come around often. Most people these days don't even notice us old-timers." Jason tilted his head, studying the man in front of him. Maybe more people should. Henry took a sip of the wine that had been brought to his table, letting the flavor linger for a moment before speaking. "You know, I wasn't sure about coming here tonight. Fancy places like this, they're not usually my thing. But something told me I needed to be here." Jason raised an eyebrow. "And how's it working out so far?" Henry grinned. "Better than I expected. You know, I've been around long enough to see how the world can sometimes feel cold and distant. But tonight reminded me that there's still a lot of good out there." As the two men talked, a small crowd began to form near the edges of the restaurant, diners quietly eavesdropping on their exchange. The conversation flowed naturally, with Henry sharing stories of his time in the service and Jason offering glimpses of his life in the limelight. At one point, Henry leaned in slightly, his tone becoming more serious. "You know, your face, it's familiar. I couldn't place it at first, but now I think I know why. You're Jason Statham, aren't you?" Jason sighed, a sheepish grin spreading across his face. "Guilty as charged. Guess my disguise didn't work as well as I thought." Henry laughed, a deep, genuine sound that drew smiles from those nearby. "Well, I have to say, you've handled tonight with more class than I've seen from most people. Fame or no fame." Jason shrugged. "Fame's just noise. What matters is what you do when it counts." Their conversation was interrupted by a server bringing over a dessert platter, compliments of the chef. Jason and Henry exchanged amused glances as the server set down an array of decadent treats. "Seems you've made an impression tonight," Jason said, gesturing to the platter. Henry chuckled. "I think we both have." As they shared the desserts, a man from another table approached cautiously. "Excuse me, Mr. Wheeler," he said. "I just wanted to say thank you. My father was a veteran, and hearing your story tonight, it really meant something to me." Henry nodded, shaking the man's hand. "I appreciate that. It means a lot to know the sacrifices weren't forgotten." The man turned to Jason. "And you, sir, what you did tonight? I've got 2 boys over there, and I hope they grow up to be half as decent as you." Jason, caught off guard, offered a modest smile. "Thank you. I'm just glad it made a difference." As the evening wound down, Jason and Henry found themselves the unwitting center of a moment that had brought together an entire room of strangers. When the time came to leave, Henry extended his hand once more. "Thank you, Jason, for tonight, for everything." Jason shook his hand firmly. "No, Henry, thank you, for your service, for your wisdom, and for letting me share this moment with you." As Jason exited the restaurant, he glanced back one last time, seeing Henry surrounded by diners offering their thanks and handshakes. He couldn't help but smile, knowing that one simple act of kindness had sparked something far greater. Jason walked out into the cool evening air, feeling lighter than he had in months. The hum of traffic and distant city noises filled the silence left after the warm atmosphere of the restaurant. He paused for a moment at the curb, watching the lights of passing cars blur in the night. What had started as an ordinary evening had turned into something profound, one of those rare, unscripted moments that even a seasoned actor like him couldn't have written better. As he waited for his car to arrive, a young man approached him hesitantly. He wore a crisp suit, but looked nervous, clutching his phone as though it were a lifeline. "Excuse me, Mr. Statham," the man began, his voice wavering slightly. Jason turned, offering a small, reassuring smile. "Yes? I, uh, I was in the restaurant tonight," the man said, gesturing back toward Le Jardin. "I saw what you did for Mr. Wheeler. I just wanted to say thank you. My father's a retired vet, and seeing someone like you show that kind of respect, it really hit home." Jason nodded, his demeanor calm but sincere. "It's the least anyone could do. Men like him, they've given more than we could ever repay." The young man shifted nervously on his feet, as if debating whether to continue. Finally, he said, "I know you probably hear this all the time, but you've inspired me tonight. Not just because of who you are, but because of what you did. It made me realize how important it is to pay it forward." Jason clapped a hand on the man's shoulder, his grip firm but encouraging. "Then do it," he said simply. "Doesn't have to be big. Just make it count." The man smiled, his confidence bolstered. "I will." "Thank you." As the man walked away, Jason's car pulled up to the curb, the sleek black vehicle gleaming under the streetlights. He slid into the back seat, greeted by the soft leather and muted glow of the dashboard. The driver, a professional-looking man in his 40s, glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Heading home, Mr. Statham?" the driver asked. Jason hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. "Not yet. There's a veterans shelter on East 54th. Can we stop there first?" The driver's eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise, but nodded. "Of course, sir." The ride was quiet, the cityscape passing by in a blur of neon signs and bustling sidewalks. Jason's thoughts drifted back to Henry Wheeler and the stories he had shared. There was a gravity to those words, a reminder of sacrifices made and lives forever altered. Jason had always admired resilience, but tonight had deepened that respect into something more personal. When they arrived at the shelter, Jason stepped out into the chilly night air, pulling his coat tighter around him. The building was modest, its exterior worn but clean, with a warm light spilling from the windows. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. A woman at the reception desk looked up, her expression briefly startled as she recognized him. "Mr. Statham," she said, rising to her feet. "This is unexpected." Jason smiled, his tone casual. "I was in the area and thought I'd drop by. Anything you're short on tonight? Supplies? Volunteers?" The woman blinked, then quickly recovered, gesturing to a donation box near the desk. "We're always in need of blankets and toiletries," she said. "And, well, the holidays are coming up, so anything festive would be a blessing." Jason reached into his pocket and pulled out a checkbook, scribbling a quick note before handing it to her. "This should help get you started, and I'll make sure more comes your way." The woman's eyes widened as she glanced at the check. "This is... thank you. Truly." Jason nodded, his smile faint but genuine. "The real thanks go to the people here, the ones who've served and the ones helping them get back on their feet. I'm just doing my part." As he stepped back outside, the chill of the night seemed less biting. The air felt fresher, the city lights brighter. Jason climbed back into the car, his mind already turning to how he could do more, not just tonight, but in the days to come. The driver, sensing Jason's contemplative mood, remained silent as they pulled away from the curb. Jason stared out the window, watching the city blur past, his thoughts a steady hum of reflection and resolve. The night had started as a quiet dinner, a moment of solitude amid the chaos of his life, but it had turned into something far greater, a reminder of the connections that bind us all and the simple acts of kindness that can ripple outward in ways we may never fully understand. As they neared his home, Jason leaned back in his seat, a faint smile playing on his lips. Tonight, he had witnessed the best of humanity, its strength, its gratitude, and its unyielding capacity for compassion. And for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. This story is proof that even in the most unexpected places, acts of kindness can create unforgettable memories. Jason Statham's willingness to step out of the spotlight and into the role of a compassionate human being made waves that will resonate far beyond that restaurant. At Stories That Heal, we celebrate moments like these because they remind us all of the importance of empathy and gratitude. Thank you for watching, and until next time, let's continue to inspire and be inspired by the goodness in the world.